Hi, this is Amanda.
And this is Jen.
And you're listening to Just This, a podcast that explores everything around being and becoming a mother or parent.
We're excited to have you join us as we dive into the practical details as well as the unseen energetics on topics that span from preconception to years after birth. All right, so we're here and I'm excited to talk about the topic of unsolicited advice because you're asking me when we were trying to pick a topic to talk about, you're like, what's coming up for you and your clients? And the big one was actually unsolicited advice. And I thought it was a good one because it hasn't actually come up in a while, but it is like a huge thing that we don't really talk about in the birthing community. And we could even extend that out to unsolicited touch, to people touching your belly unsolicitedly. I never had that happen personally, but I don't know if you did. And I hear other people having it too. But let's start with the belly. Did you ever have your belly touched unsolicitedly?
Nothing comes to mind. There were times I feel like when I was asked, there was a sense of feeling uncomfortable saying no. It is weird the difference of when you are pregnant and somehow usually we would be like, no, I don't want you to touch my body. But for some reason, when you're pregnant, you feel like I should be allowing people to touch me or whatever it is. In so many ways, your body just becomes this other thing. It's not just your body anymore. And I know the perception and even the perception you have, not just other people have, how that changes. But nothing comes to mind as far as actually people, luckily, just coming and touching my belly.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, when you said unsolicited touch, and we can push this into the convo of unsolicited advice, I was actually thinking of your baby, of people coming and touching your baby when you haven't given consent or permission for that. Yeah. I feel like that's very, very common as well.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was thinking that too, as you're saying the pregnancy one. And it's funny because sometimes I'll see those little signs on the baby car seats and stuff like that. Like, please do not touch baby. Some well-worded thing, but basically don't touch my baby. And the first time I saw those, do people just randomly go up and touch other people's babies? Where do they get in their head that it's okay to go up and touch a child and, a baby? Did that ever happen with you?
I think it wasn't as much in public as sometimes people coming into the home to feel like they're helpful. We were very protective of that first 40-day space. But there were times when people would come over and just immediately feel that just picking up the baby was what was needed, which is often not what's needed.
No, ever.
Unless it's asked for.
Yes, unless it's asked for. Yeah.
But how about you? Let's go back to the belly part. Did you have any experiences of people just coming up and?
No, I didn't. I didn't have anyone trying to go up. I think I do recall being asked once and it felt okay and appropriate at that time. And I think the note there, the importance there is to really listen to yourself and what you feel is appropriate and be okay saying no. It's okay to say no. They're in your field and they're touching you and they're touching your baby, and babies are sensitive. They feel everything that we're feeling. So if we're feeling uncomfortable and we allow some stranger to come up when we don't actually want them to be touching their body, they're going to feel that. And so tell them no and teach your baby from the beginning boundaries.
Yeah. You don't have to have any reason. If you feel a no for any reason, sometimes I'm like, oh, logically, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't need to be logical ever.
Nope.
Somatics are not logical sometimes.
No, exactly. So. And also too, thinking about myself in everyday life, there's times that I want people over and I want a hug and sometimes I need that. And then there's other times that I want to curl up in my bed and not be touched or talked to. And I might need to lie it out. I don't want you to come and tell me it's going to be okay or to touch me or hug me. And so I think that's the same when you're pregnant. There's going to be times when you're like, yeah, I don't mind a little extra love and touch. And other times you're like, get off me, do not touch me. Or I'm going to have some hormonal problems here with you.
For unsolicited advice, I'm curious. I mean, I'd love to know your experience too, but were there any specific situations that came up recently that brought this topic to mind?
Yeah. So a client was experiencing something where she went to some baby shower and family was an MD, and she was just sitting there touching her and like giving her advice. When you go back to those moments, you want to redo it, relive it, and be like, don't do this, be more stern. And so after she talked about it with us, and I'm sure she thought about it before, but she's like, we definitely have to set up more boundaries around what is okay and what is not okay. And for me, as far as unsolicited advice, I definitely got some for sure. I think the one that really impacted me was immediately after my son was born, not immediately, but within the first 6 to 12 hours. My mother-in-law was looking at baby and holding him, and I was holding baby at that time. She's like, don't hold the baby too much. It's, when you're hearing it, it's probably not a big deal. And even when I hear it now, it's not the biggest deal, but postpartum, within 6 hours, I'm holding my baby and I freaking love my child. And also I'm super hormonal and just had this child, and you're telling me not to hold it too much. It was just it just affected me in a really harsh way. We feel that in Chinese medicine, like after birth, you're like completely open. So you're also just really sensitive to people's advice. And here you are, you just love your child and you want to hold them forever, right? That's what's in your mind postpartum, which is good. It's healthy. But then to have somebody come to you and tell you that basically, no, don't do that. It just was heart-wrenching at that moment.
Yeah.
And I told people about it because I had to process that out, because it really hurt me to hear, don't hold your baby too much, which I also don't agree with at all. I don't think you can overhold your child, but that's just my opinion.
Well, and I think this is important to note. The first thing is you're going to be given the touch, maybe not so much. Hopefully we're in a world where people understand consent before they touch people, even pregnant people.
Yes.
Yeah. But you will receive unsolicited advice. I don't know anyone from conception through parenthood who has never received unsolicited advice. So with that knowing, probably earlier on, coming up with some phrase, like as early as you can in pregnancy or even preconception, come up with whatever phrase you're going to use and practice that phrase to communicate thank you and stop, kind of basically. And some there's probably 1,000,002 ways, and we can find some great phrases and put them in the show notes, but coming up with a phrase that's basically thank you for this and you need to stop now. I don't need this input. I don't need this advice, whatever it is. Because if you can practice saying that earlier on before you're in the situation, I think then when you are in a situation, there are going to be certain situations or people where maybe it bounces off you like water or whatever, you just doesn't come in. But there will be other ones, and you'll notice it's starting to trigger you. And as soon as you notice that trigger, you can have practiced and utilize that communication of it's time for you to stop, basically, because it will come up. And just like you said, not just post-birth, but even in pregnancy, I find it's like a kind of this weird spectrum thing where as you are entering into your pregnancy, it could even be earlier pregnancy, you're open, you're more intuitive, you're more sensitive, you're more open, or you're opening up and you're receptive to things and receiving things differently than when you're not pregnant and not postpartum, for sure. There's there's energetic fields that are totally shifting, changing all through your pregnancy, even post-birth. We've talked about this. There's an identity shift post-birth. It doesn't matter what baby you're on. There's going to be a new layer of identity. So you're still like the caterpillar in the cocoon, all gooey. And so, yes, what you're receiving is going to be very different from, let's say, preconception of any child, or even have like a 10-year-old child and you haven't given birth. It's been 10 years since you've given birth. So you're in a very more sovereign state energetically. I just think it's super important to know it's going to happen and practice it. And also just see, it's very interesting too, if you have the power, like on your phone, on a note, like a little note on your phone, or even I knew somebody who took a journal and she practiced this only postpartum, but even during pregnancy would be a great thing to practice, is when you do receive some feedback and it does feel emotional or it triggers you, write it down. Because I think there is an element of when you write it down, there can be some practice to release it later. But also there's also like, it helps you to see patterns of maybe what what kind of input is coming into you that doesn't feel as comfortable as other ones that you just bounce off, like, okay, that just doesn't, you don't take it in as much. So if
Right.
you have a power to write it down, it's almost like tracking your dreams. You can
Mm-hmm.
kind of get a little tap into that subconscious of like, okay, I need to protect myself a little bit around this part. My inner child right here is pretty tender, whatever it
Yeah.
is. So
I
yeah.
like that. So one thing my midwife told me, and probably is what prompted this, and what I tell my clients if it comes up, this is your child and it's your turn to choose what you want to do and how you raise them. And this other person had their chance and they got to choose how they raised their kid. And I think even if you don't say that out loud to them, to remind yourself, yeah, this is my child, this is my choice, and they've had their chance and they had their choice.
Yeah.
And I love breastfeeding. Like I love assisting moms in the breastfeeding transition, which is always very emotional and extremely challenging, but try to only give 3 pieces of advice from the beginning. The first piece of advice I always give is have fun. And the second one I always tell them is, I said, you're going to get a ton of advice on breastfeeding, including from me. And it's going to all be different and they're going to all like cross. But the key is to like take in what works and get rid of stuff that doesn't, including the stuff that you hear from me. If you're like, Jen, this shit is not working, then freaking just throw it in the trash and like take what does work for you. Because like you said, with parenting advice, it's so true. Some of the advice you hear is just, yeah, okay. Sometimes when you get advice, people telling me it's wrong to like call my son Melvin, like to accept his new changed name. Yeah, whatever. You don't know anything. But then they give me other advice and I'm all triggered by it. So I love that idea of actually writing those down. And then when I have some time, going back and seeing where that comes from and dive deeper into that. I really,
Yeah. And just to expand on my child, my choice kind of thing, I know that can sound, that kind of does, to me at least, comes off sound like my child, my choice. Like it's a little harsh. Really what it is you know what's best for your child.
mm-hmm,
Nobody else knows what's best for, especially a newborn baby that was inside you
yeah,
just recently. You are the most energetically attached and attuned to that child. And while it can feel even scary, or you can feel unsure or not confident at all, you really,
mm-hmm,
you know what's best for that child. And what's best for you and that child might not be best for what's best for your friend, even who's at the exact same, who gave birth on the exact same day in the exact same way. Every combination of mother child family is going to be very different. And
mm-hmm,
really, it's not just my child, my choice. It's really, I trust the wisdom of the mother because that's the best wisdom there is. Sure, like ask, or if you want to take it. And I love that you tell people take it or leave it. I think that's really what it is. I can give you some suggestions or I can give you some ideas of how some other people do it. But really, these are things you can try on.
mm-hmm.
And it's what's going to be what resonates with you most and what works for you best.
Yep.
And that might even be something totally opposite of what we're even suggesting to
Mm-hmm.
the parents. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's interesting too, because I remember recommending to one client a nipple shield and I checked in with the next day and it just didn't work. A few days later, they're like, the nipple shield is so amazing. I think that's so common too as a parent, and especially with babies. Some stuff that doesn't work now actually ends up working later. Also too, sometimes you have to give it a little time to
Mm-hmm.
try out with advice. That's why I take what works and trash out what doesn't. And just, you're going to know. I totally agree. That whole, like, this is my child, my choice. It's not meant to be in a way that's like, hey, you messed up or that's not the right way to do it. It's just, I don't want to do it that way. I don't feel that that's going to be, like you said, the best for me as a mother and my child. And I really believe my parents did the best they could with the
Mm-hmm.
information that they had at the time. And I believe I'm doing the best that I can with the information that I have for my son
Yeah.
at this time. And if I don't honor that and really honor my intuition, then I'm going to have a lot of regret. The other thing I think and takeaway as a mom or as a friend is when we're listening to other people talk about problems, I really try, and it's hard for me to not give advice, but just really listen. And if I do want to give advice, I try to ask like, hey, would you like my take on it or some options to try, instead of just going out there and just saying, you should do this. Because ultimately, I think we kind of know what to do. It's just that sometimes we need to talk it
Yeah.
out.
That's just a good practice for postpartum anyway, because a lot of times what we're needing to do is just talk through things, especially postpartum, or let it out, let the emotions out. yeah, they always say in the postpartum work, listen more than you talk.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess
It's,
maybe that's great it's good, probably good skill for life too.
oh yeah. It's actually a lot harder. I took a grieving class and we had to sit there and do like a thing where you just listen for basically an hour and say nothing. Ultimately, you really weren't supposed to say anything, and it's extremely hard. But being on the other end of it, it's such an amazing experience to have someone be fully present with you and
Mm.
hear you and not try to give you advice or fix it or make you feel better, or they are just basically there for you. Yeah. And then also this idea of touching your baby and stuff. It's so interesting because as a midwife, I never asked to hold a baby ever. We never asked to do that. That's just not in our field. And even when I go over to friends' houses that just had babies, I never ask to hold their baby. I always wait for them to offer, hey, would you like to hold the baby? And of course, once they offer, it's like, yes. But it's never like go over there and just sit down and hold a baby. So I think that's also something to, if you want to be a good, supportive friend or family member post baby, is never asked to hold and just wait to be offered it.
Did
Unless
you
they
want
have.
to touch on, I know you had mentioned before something about like unsolicited advice from medical.
Oh, from medical professionals. Yeah, actually. So I think that what I kind of wanted to touch on with that was, I don't know if it's so much unsolicited advice, but the fact that we sometimes like get advice or information from medical providers. I think that sometimes we kind of believe that it is always correct, and we bypass our intuition about how we're actually feeling or what we really think is right with our kid. And this was prompted recently because a pediatrician kind of missed something with a baby that we've had that was newborn. And I find it common because I think even sometimes I'll go into the doctor's office and we just kind of take in, right? Like we just kind of accept what they say. And so we listen to a medical professional because we're taught that they know better than us and they know better than our intuition and our instincts, and that we should be trusting that. And the truth is sometimes they're not. Sometimes they don't. I say it this way. I say no one's going to care about your kid as much as you. Granted, doctors care. I care, like as a midwife, I totally care about your baby, but there would be no way I will not even compare to the amount of care and love and understanding that you have of your child compared to me, even as a professional. Really listen to your intuition. I think it's so true to really hone in and listen to that. Just intuitively, the intuition always is end up being right.
I think the key point here with the medical stuff, from my point of view, is yes, medical professionals have the training of medicine behind them, but the training of medicine is only such a small piece of the bigger picture of pregnancy and birth and postpartum. Mm-hmm. So when you do get advice, if you're in some acute medical situation with your pregnancy or birth or postpartum, yes, listen to that medical advice. But otherwise, generally, after you give birth, you'll get, especially if you're in a hospital, you'll be given a lot of different advice from different nurses or different people, especially on baby care, how to do things or how to breastfeed, from lactation consultants. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to remember that, again, these are just different views. Right? There is no one set way to do a lot of this stuff. And so it is just from personal perspective, experience. A medical professional is less likely to tell you what you would tell somebody, which is take what works and leave the rest. They won't say that often. Right. But I think it's important just to remember, oftentimes with birth and pregnancy and postpartum, you can take what works and leave the rest in medicine. Because unless it's an acute medical situation, I love, there is a quote, I think that the indie birth community uses, is birth is not a medical event. And I love that saying, because it's true. We forget that birth is actually not a medical event unless it becomes one for some reason.
Totally.
It's a very natural thing that happens every day all around the world, thousands of times over. So we've somehow in our brains though, because they happen in hospitals so frequently, have identified it as equivalent to medicine, which it doesn't need to be. So I think there's just an importance of understanding, like you said, people take sometimes the advice from a doctor as it has to be this way, or we have to, and it just keep an open mind of knowing that unless you're in an acute medical situation, whatever it is, oftentimes use your intuition and take what resonates with you and leave the rest. So.
Yeah. And I would say with that too, get second opinions. You really feel intuitively that something is not right. Get a second opinion and it doesn't hurt. And I totally respect the Western community. And I think that medicine is really hard. Just the amount of information that I have to learn for a baby and mom. And I'm only studying the first 6 weeks of a baby's life. Pediatricians can study all the way up to 18. And I'm still learning. And I imagine I'm going to continue to learn until I get out of the career or choose not to take in more information. And every single physical body is so different too. And the way it reacts, the intuition is just so important. So if you think that there's something off, get that second advice. And I tell moms too, I say, even if you're like worried about it, just go get it checked out. Just for your own peace of mind, just go get it checked out. It's okay. Yeah. If you need a second, do that.
And oftentimes you can even nowadays, the beauty of technology, and one of the great ways is you can reach out to a nurse over the phone. Again, trust your intuition. Does this feel like something that, well, I'm not sure, I just want to describe something? And again, that's great with having postpartum support or doulas or a midwife postpartum. It's really good to have that kind of reassurance. Sometimes it's the same reason you have a doula for birth. I did want to also talk about just unsolicited advice from online.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
just good. Like to just touch on this for like before we wrap up.
So important. I love it. Yes.
Because as much as we have people coming into our lives or people that are around us that give unsolicited advice, I always caution going online to look for advice in general, because again, you're going to get, especially with search engines, 1,000,002 things. And then very popular these days is groups, moms groups online. To be in a mom's group, you have a lot of time on your hands, or when you're breastfeeding, you want to be in these spaces or energetic spaces that you feel are resonant with where you are. And so it's very common to want to hang out in these online mom groups, which can they can be very supportive and create that energetic container that you need, but they can also sometimes have a lot of opinions, and both directly and indirectly to people. So if you're going to post a question, I usually recommend people do not post questions in these moms groups for the first 40 days for sure, while you're recalibrating, and try to not go into them, but to each their own. And sometimes people want to go in there and they want to ask it a kind of a poll, like, hey, is this normal? Or I'm experiencing a problem with XYZ, and get people's inputs. And just to know that, again, take it or leave it, energetically set some protections as you do that. And just know that there's sometimes tons of people in these groups and everyone's experience is different, and take it or leave whatever you're going to get from those groups. Yeah. I always recommend having if you haven't given birth yet, or even if you're thinking about getting pregnant, pick your like 3 or 4 people that you're like, these are, I want to be my go-to people. And that could be your doctor. It could be your midwife, whatever it is. It's just intuitively, who do you feel like you trust, and kind of use those as your core go-tos. I think when you do, could be your sister, it could be your mom, if you really have a good relationship with your mom, whoever it is, that's usually my recommendation, is pick your go-to people that can be good listeners that you intuitively are going to connect with. Because if you're intuitively connecting with them and choosing them, then oftentimes they're supporting you in the way that you need to be supported.
Totally. Yeah, I like that too. I know I remember seeing in mom groups some medical advice, and then you read everything, right? And it's great. Like I like it because sometimes I learn about a new herb or a new like tincture to try for kids, and really harsh stuff too. Sometimes I'm like, dang, it's like mom's gonna be harsh. I think one of the things I really like those group for is for recommendations. Hey, who do you recommend for a pediatrician, or who do you recommend for an OB? Because I think those are actually really great people to ask because they've been in it. Yeah. And of course, like you're saying, everyone has different experiences, but for the most part, you'll get at least a good handful of this is the best doctor, and maybe one experience, they were awful to me or whatever. Yeah. And then at that point, you're like, okay, they're probably generally pretty good.
in recommendations on products, even
Yeah.
I think it's fine to post in there. Just know that there will occasionally be, there could just, it's just like if you were asking a group of hundreds of people, there might
Mm-hmm.
be somebody in that group that says something that triggers you, or it doesn't.
Right.
It's just, it's a lot different because we think when these groups, we forget that there's a lot more people, and we forget, go to these places to be safe spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And we can forget that sometimes people are people, and we all get triggered, and we all say things that we're not supposed to say. So
Yeah. And definitely be aware of Google for sure. For sure.
yeah. Well, I think the hardest thing I've experienced just with people I've worked with there is they want to answer to a question, and then sometimes it's like there's 12 different answers, and which one's the right one, and then it gets more confusing. And I think that's why people do turn to the moms groups, because there is some sense of, okay, well, Google's giving me 12 answers. What are people actually doing out there?
Right.
And then the likelihood is there's going to be 12 answers in there too. So it's, again, coming back to, okay, look at all those answers, close your eyes, take a deep breath. What feels right to you? Like, which of these ones seems to like make sense for you? Because if there's 12 answers, there's usually 12 ways to do it.
Yeah, to do it. Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Anything else for unsolicited advice? I think we kind of like went on some tangents there, but I think it was good.
I think that covers a lot of it. And with unsolicited touch, we should definitely just do another episode on that, because I think we can expand on the unsolicited touch during pregnancy, but also with baby.
Yeah. And especially with that, when we do that topic, I think it'd be great to talk about touch and during labor too, because that's also another.
Yeah. It's all tied in, but
it's a good
that's
one.
where practicing the communication for unsolicited advice as early as possible. But then that's why they teach you to also start practicing unsolicited touch, or even, that's a whole another podcast, but we'll get into that and that'll be fun. So the takeaway here is start practicing, find your phrase. Start thanking somebody for their advice, their unsolicited advice, but also shutting it down, because there'll probably be times when you'll need to use it. So find that phrase and practice that phrase, no matter where you are, even if it's after you've given birth, because I promise you, end of the years beyond birth, you'll get unsolicited parenting advice too. It doesn't go away.
I think one of the best things that we were kind of talking about with that client was kind of defining that person's role. This is your role, is to be auntie, and that's it. Not to tell me how to parent or tell me what I need to do, to kind of define the role.
We'll try to put some things in the show notes of either phrases and or just tools that
I love it.
So, and if you have a tool that you use or a phrase, I love hearing people's phrases around this. So if you have a phrase that you use, please share it. We'd love to hear it.
Yes, definitely. Hey there, amazing listeners. We just want to say a huge thank you for tuning into our convo on the Just This podcast today. We appreciate each and every one of our listeners, and your continued support means the world to us.
If you enjoyed this episode and found value in it, we would be incredibly grateful if you could take a moment to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or share this episode with someone you think would enjoy it too. Your reviews and shares not only motivate us, but they also help others discover our show.
We're also all about keeping the conversation going and hanging out with our incredible community. Head over to justthis.site, that's justhis.site, where you'll find additional resources, ways to connect with us, and join the conversation, plus some more goodies.
Thank you again for being a part of the Just This community. We'll be back soon. Until next time, remember to take care of yourself and embrace the wonder as you navigate this extraordinary adventure.